Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Radio Islam International. And in studios, we've got Angelo Fick from the SMC studios. He's one of the panelists there, and he's also part of Asri, a political analyst, and also does regular commentary on political issues on Radio Islam International. Angelo, Jazakallah for your time. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Radio Islam International.
Wa alaikum assalam to you and to your listeners.
It was a long, drawn-out speech by the president. We're not accustomed to that. Usually we were accustomed to the former president giving such long, drawn-out speeches. That's because of the huge fonts and the time it could take him to get through his content. Talking about the president's speech, your overall impression, were you convinced by what he was saying?
Right, so my overall impression of the speech is that it was very much focused on, one, calming everyone in the hall down to make sure that everybody gets on board with this particular version of the conference, giving an organizational report that confronted all the members with some very hard, honest views of the organization and its challenges. Where I think it could do with a lot more work is in its analysis of the situation the country and the world finds itself in, and the possibility of the future, because as a report it's very much focused on the ANC survival in the short to medium term. It's very much focused on a South Africa that survives and needs challenges until 2030. It seems very unconcerned with how dealing with that is one challenge, but we also need to deal with what happens after 2040 and 2050, when all of the people currently talking, including myself, will no longer be on this planet, and young people, the majority of South Africans, will have to deal with the consequences.
Mm-hmm. We also see that the president, as I quote him, says that steps have to be taken against state capture, and this as time has caused friction amongst us. He's speaking about a very sensitive topic in the context of what he finds himself in.
Absolutely. So the issue of state capture is, I think, defined very narrowly in the African National Congress as what has happened under the Zuma administration. But the problem for those of us who sit in 2022 is that the global pandemic and South Africa's response to it happened after the Zuma administration ended. And in the middle of 2020, there were people very close to Mr. Ramaphosa who were implicated in PPE scandals. And so the question is whether or not state capture is going to be only defined as the corruption under the Zuma administration and the Zondo Commission report, or whether we're going to think of how this is actually a way of doing business that we need to move beyond and put things in place to prevent it from, one, continuing, make sure that it stops, and prevent it from recurring.
He also spoke about and he acknowledged the factionalism battle, the battle that's going on in the party, as well as with the alliance, the fragility there. What do you make of that?
So again, I don't think that Mr. Ramaphosa I think he's being realistic, and I think his advisors have told him that it's not going to work as well this time round as it has before, of suturing over and providing a kind of nice view of the tripartite alliance, because the tripartite alliance partners members in trade union membership, workers, and their representation in COSATU, and ordinary people who are communists and believe in the SACP, have felt that the ANC has dominated the alliance and has not actually delivered on their aspirations and desires. We are the most unequal society in the world, and that is under the guise of a government that has supposedly been in alliance with the South African Communist Party and the Congress of South African Trade Unions. And so this is for the first time, I think, important that the head of the ANC acknowledges that the partnership needs work and that the people who are supposedly benefiting from this partnership haven't done so.
And let's speak about the election. That's one of the highlights of the conference, which basically elects the new leadership going into the next phase of their journey, the next 5 years. We see a number of opponents, so-called opponents, the alleged plan in place where the president has been culling his opponents. We saw the axe falling on Western Cape Judge John Shlope. We've seen Batabile Dlamini and others. How do you interpret all of this, given the fact that this is all happening just moments before the conference is starting?
So I think there's no doubt that the ANC came into this conference with what, in a different context, Terry Bell and Dumiza Nzebeza talk about as the unfinished business of post-apartheid South Africa. The ANC came in with unfinished business, and so last-minute things had to be put in place. But I do think that one of the moments that I read into the president's way of framing these issues in his report was to take the prerogative of an ANC president and summarize the organization's response to this, and thereby further neutralizing some of his opponents in this particular report by suggesting that opposition to his agenda and the agenda of his supporters is going to, one, undermine the ANC, two, will be counter the law of the land, three, will destabilize the constitution and the constitutional democratic order. And here I think he was taking a direct hit at Lindiwe Sisulu and her particular remarks about the constitution and about judges and the judiciary and separation of powers, and a direct assault on the suspended Secretary General and his remarks outside the conference and over the last year, and a direct also hit on Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma and her remarks not only ahead of the parliamentary vote on Tuesday, but also subsequent to that by talking about the ways in which she maneuvers herself as a disciplined cadre of the ANC. So I think this was also, again, a moment in which Cyril Ramaphosa signalled to his opponents that he's not going to go down without a fight, that he's not going to be that person that was rumoured a few weeks ago would quietly resign and go off onto his wealth, that he is going to fight for control of the party, and that this was going to be what he once again says is a principled fight. Whether or not that works out as a principled fight isn't only dependent on whether he wins the elective conference, it's what he does if he wins afterwards. And here I think people are already beginning to listen out for what is going to be said in the January 8th statement and how will matters be dealt with afterwards.
Finally, as we wrap up this evening, the question of the significant delay with the conference getting started. The political report was supposed to be delivered in the morning around 9:15. We see that only starting 4:15 in the afternoon, a significant 7-hour delay, pushing items on the agenda, creating a backlog. How has this frustrated the delegates, number one? And number two, how has this further tension the rift between the different factions, and the fact that they will now eat into other key items on the agenda? How will this all play out?
So I think it reflected badly on the party, and that I think is part of why the President was so insistent at the beginning of his address that people calm down and processes continue, and Gwede Mantashe backed him up on this. In terms of the delegates, I think there's going to be anxiety and unhappiness among delegates who feel that they've been excluded and haven't actually been present. And the accreditation process and the auditing process is always going to be difficult, but I think this time it's particularly bad. As for the 8 or so hours or 7 hours of delay, I think that was an embarrassment for the party because there were international observers that they had invited to be here at 8:30. And while the ANC has sometimes been late, this has been spectacularly bad for it. And how the ordinary public and all of those other outsiders that the ANC says is part of its mix of addressing the challenges in South Africa perceive this is, I think, going to be of great concern.
Angelo, thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated.
Jazakallah, shukran so much for giving me the opportunity.